Hello there, welcome to Planet America's Fireside Chat. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Chaz Licciardello.
Coming up, a preview of next week's crucial first presidential debate and a deep dive into America's largest minority group.
And do not believe the hype, America's crime rate is heading down. We're going to crunch those numbers, but first.
It's being hailed as the biggest reform to America's immigration system in over a decade. President Biden has given legal protection to more than 500,000 undocumented spouses of US citizens and their children. Currently, spouses have to leave the United States to apply for legal residency in America, potentially breaking up families. But under this executive order, they can now stay in America and work while their paperwork is being processed, although it does only apply to undocumented spouses who have been in the United States for at least 10 years and only after they pass a background check.
These couples have been raising families, sending their kids to church and school, paying taxes, contributing to our country for 10 years or more. Matter of fact, the average time they've spent here is 23 years. People were affected today. But living in the United States all this time with fear and uncertainty, we can fix that. And that's what I'm going to do today. Fix it.
This is a measure that Joe Biden has been pushing for a while. He'd hoped that it would pass as a part of that bipartisan immigration legislation that was ultimately scuttled by Republican opposition, including that of former President Donald Trump. Biden's announcement this week came at a ceremony marking 12 years since the Obama administration's DACA program was announced. DACA removed the threat of deportation for hundreds of thousands of undocumented people who had arrived as children in the United States last century. Many of them now, of course, have children of their own who are American citizens throughout. Interesting, Chaz, that this was done as a distinct echo of DACA from Joe Biden. The 12th anniversary of DACA was a slightly tenuous hook to try and attach it to, but clearly he's going for a similar sense of this is the right and fair and sort of pro-family thing to be doing in the immigration space, where clearly a lot of it can be seen as sort of anti-family, separating families at the border, things like that.
Yeah, look, I mean, there is no doubt, I think, that from a policy point of view, this is an appealing reform because, like, Trump can beat the drum about migrant crime, etc. But these people that he's targeting, they're not even available unless they've been around for 10 years and they're married, they're settled down, and they can't be a public threat. Yeah. So these are the people you want to keep. No one wants to split up these families, and so it's sensible to target them. I should also say, he's not giving them any rights that they didn't already have. These people have the right to get a green card if they are married to an American citizen. But the process until now they had to go through was to head to another country for maybe 10 years before they could get that green card. And so there were practical issues. So he's not actually giving people the right to citizenship who didn't have it anyway. But he's just given them the actual opportunity because they were never going to go through that path. And so from a policy point of view, it makes sense. It's an interesting question, though, about whether the politics is going to work. I mean, there are certainly, like you raised the balancing issue, there are apparently 100,000 people, voters, in mixed race households where one of them is an illegal immigrant in Arizona, in Nevada, and in Georgia, 3 pretty critical states. But then on the other hand, how many votes is he losing? It's an interesting question. It
is. On the one hand, you can say, well, this is only affecting, 500,000 people, but that's 500,000 families. And for the US citizens whose spouse is undocumented, not only is life for an undocumented immigrant in the United States tough in terms of where you can work, where you have to kind of, hide in plain sight in certain communities, but it means you can miss out on job opportunities. There are certain jobs that are not open to you. This also opens up employment options for those people who are now in the process of seeking to get their green card. So from that point of view, you would think this could potentially sway literally millions of votes in some states that matter. Certainly hundreds of thousands of votes in those states like Nevada and Arizona.
It could, from an economic point of view, we should point out this affects their undocumented status, affects their American citizen children.
Yeah.
So it actually ruins the next generation. And so it's in America's interest to sort this out.
Yeah.
One more just point I'd like to make about this, the legal side, because obviously this will get challenged in court. It's already been challenged in court. It's going to be a hard policy to challenge because you need what they call standing to challenge it, which means you need to demonstrate that you are worse off because of this order.
Yeah.
Who is worse off because of this order? It's very hard to find someone. You might think, well, maybe one of the states could do this, but the states have already tried to sue for these kinds of things before, and they've been turned down by conservative judges.
Yeah.
So even if this is illegal, they may never actually be able to have the case heard in court because they won't get standing.
And it certainly won't make it to the Supreme Court in 5 months before the election, which is at this stage what Biden is clearly most concerned about. And of course, this did come just 2 weeks after, if this is the carrot, the stick was 2 weeks ago, which was to say, if the border gets overwhelmed, we're going to shut it down on a daily basis and we're going to change the way in which asylum claims are made. So he was being tough on border arrivals 2 weeks ago. He's now being arguably soft on people who are already a part of the United States and the fabric of the United States.
That should be the case, but having now looked very closely at that executive order from a few weeks ago, I can tell you it was a complete joke. There were so many exceptions. It's done absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
And so the supposed tough on immigration executive order was just an illusion.
Yeah.
This one, I think, is very real, and this will not surprise the Republicans, I suspect.
What the Biden campaign is clearly doing at the moment is setting up a contrast. They want this to be a contrast campaign between Biden and Trump. As Biden always says, don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative. The alternative is Donald Trump. The alternative on these sorts of immigration policies is Biden saying you can stay here and have a pathway to citizenship. Trump is saying we're going to round up 11 million of you people and send you back to where you came from. That's a pretty strong contrast. But Trump has got a policy of his own which seems as though it could be extremely clever, so clever that you wonder whether he stole it from somebody. This idea that he's going to take taxes off tips for a lot of hospitality workers who the majority of their income doesn't come through salary. They get $1 or $2 an hour, but all of their money, working tables, busboys, all this kind of stuff in Las Vegas and elsewhere, it comes in tips. This could make a huge difference to a lot of people.
Yeah, I think this is a very clever policy. And by the way, just so the viewers at home know what you were referring to when you talked about stolen from someone, we have been talking before about there is some rumours that he might have nicked this policy from the Republican candidate for the Senate candidate for Nevada. Certainly, the Republican Senate candidate for Nevada is intimating that it was stolen from him. I don't know, but this is a clever policy. This is a clever policy for a number of reasons. I should say, by the way, it's an interesting one. If you want to help the poor, in terms of who are waiters, probably the easiest way to do that is to raise the tipped minimum wage, which is currently $2.13 an hour. You might not realise that. It's a very low minimum wage, and they could raise that because not every server gets to pay taxes. Like you don't even start paying taxes, even as a single person, until you've earned $12,000 a year. The average waiter earns $6,000 a year in tips. So it's possible they might not get to taxes.
Yeah. And so a lot of tips, of course, come in cash. They can be undeclared as well. It's straight into the back pocket.
Although not as many
as
as it used to be. It's only 5% of tips are cash these days because everyone pays with card these days. But yeah, so he's not necessarily helping the poorest waiters, but he's helping a lot of working class people with this and working class Latinos in Nevada, like we said before. It's clever from a politics point of view. It's also clever to undermine the attack on him from Joe Biden that his tax policy is just dropping corporate taxes, dropping the rich people's taxes. Every time Joe Biden says that, which he's going to want to say, Trump will go, hang on, I'm the one who's cutting the taxes for the waiters. Yeah. What are you doing?
Yeah.
And so I think it helps him out a lot, I think. Especially if you think about the people he's trying to target. He's not necessarily trying to target the super poor. He's trying to target the working class people who are a bit entrepreneurial, on their way up, go-getters.
Right.
And they're the people who are earning a lot of money on their tips. And they're the ones who are paying tax.
Yeah.
So I think it's well thought through. And we did discuss his marketing campaign as well about getting people to write on the receipt
Again, very clever.
Very clever, saying, vote for Trump if you don't want taxes on your tips. It's very clever. I think he's thought through this one well.
I agree. And it's a little reminiscent of when he sent out those stimulus checks during the pandemic with Donald Trump's signature on them, trying to take a bit of credit for that as well. But this does seem like, beyond the sound and fury of the campaign, this could be a very effective policy, so much so, I wonder if Joe Biden's looking at maybe a version of it himself to try and match it, to counter it, because it could be that potent. But of course, a lot of the constituents that are going to be affected by this are Latino Americans working in those sort of hospitality industries. And here's why the Latino vote in 2024 matters more than ever. Latinos whose families originally came from South or Central America are now officially the largest racial or ethnic minority group in the United States. 19% of the population now. Put that in context for you, 50 years ago, Latinos represented only 5% of America's population. Democrats have won the Latino vote over Republicans by a 2-to-1 margin in most elections since the 1970s. Back in 2016, Hillary Clinton won 66% of the Latino vote to Trump's 28%. That was back when Trump was saying things like Mexicans are rapists. But by 2020, Biden's share of the Latino vote had fallen to 59%, while Trump had jumped 10 points to 38%. And that was getting close to the Republican Latino high watermark of 44% achieved 20 years ago by George W. Bush. So, what's happening in 2024? A poll of Latinos in swing states, including Arizona and Nevada, with large Latino populations, shows quite similar head-to-head numbers to 2020. Biden 59-39 leading Trump. But if you add in Democrat-turned-independent Robert Kennedy Jr. plus Cornel West and Jill Stein, Joe Biden loses 12% support. Trump loses 5%. Kennedy is getting 12%. And you add up all those third-party candidates, and they're getting between them about 20% support, 1 in 5 Latino voters. And that is going to be a particular worry to Democrats right now, because it's mostly coming from them. So what are we going to make of all of this? And the outreach that we're seeing from both the Biden and Trump campaigns to try and win a bigger slice of the Latino vote. Mike Madrid is a long-time Republican political consultant, a leading expert on Latino and Hispanic voting patterns, and more recently he's become a prominent Never Trumper as a co-founder of the Lincoln Project. Mike Madrid, welcome to the Fireside Chat.
Thank you so much for having me.
So what did you make, Mike, of that swing state poll of Latino voters that we just heard about? That Biden and Trump head-to-head are about where they were in 2020, but add in Kennedy, West and Stein, and those third-party candidates are scooping up almost 20% of the Latino vote. What does that kind of result tell you?
Suggests that there's both a rising populism in the emergent Latino community that is essentially rejecting both parties' policy positions, if not both candidates. First and foremost, but second of all, it also shows that most of the overlap and the problems that President Biden has had with younger voters specifically also mirror identically with Latino voters. In fact, because that demographic is virtually identical. Latinos are decidedly younger. The 30 years of age is the average age of the Latino in the country compared to 40 for non-Hispanic whites. That's a very significant demographic difference, and it's showing up in both polling and election day results. So, there's some definite challenges for both parties, perhaps most acutely for President Biden at the moment.
Mike, are we just simply returning to an almost 50-50 Latino country like America was under George W. Bush?
Well, as somebody who was involved deeply with the George W. Bush campaigns, we weren't quite at 50-50. We broke 40% one time, and we viewed that as kind of historic. It would be completely unprecedented to get to a 50-50 break for a whole host of reasons, but we will get there at some point, largely for demographic reasons. If you let me explain for a quick moment, the fastest growth in the Latino electorate is what we call third generation now, a third and fourth generation, which are the grandchildren of immigrants. So despite the conventional media narrative that Latino voters are largely migrant workers, migrant voters, naturalized voters, the truth is the explosive growth, the really exponential growth that we're beginning to see now are from US-born third-generation Latinos, overwhelmingly English speakers, English dominant. That's decidedly different than the George Bush campaigns that I was involved with in the year 2000, 25 years ago, it was a generation ago, where the Latino vote was much more recently migrated, was much more Spanish dominant, was much more focused on issues related to the undocumented and the border.
Okay, so at what point do Latinos just become effectively white for political purposes?
That's what we consider the great American question. We have for centuries now. I argue in my book that what we're seeing is actually a prolonged assimilation effect, in large part because the border between the United States and Mexico is the largest border between first and third world countries. And the seamlessness of the border, not just through undocumented immigration, but through regular migration and returning patterns, along with technology, allows for this cultural seamlessness to take place, this continual cultural reinforcement. You add to that the extraordinary numbers of people who have arrived from Mexico and Central America over the course of the past 30, 40 years. And what you have is something that is beyond the traditional American melting pot. It's beyond the traditional assimilative pattern. In fact, I argue in my book that what's going to happen is that Americans will become more like Latinos than Latinos will become more like Americans. And that's a unique, profound difference. The United States of America has never been anything other than a non-white, than a white majority country, and that we will be a non-white majority country in 8 short years, due largely to the growth, the exponential growth of Latinos, or the Latinization of America.
Mike, we've also been talking this week about Trump's no tax on tips plan. It obviously seems to be a pretty blatant play for the working class vote in places like Nevada, but do you think it'll actually work politically?
Well, that's a great actual policy issue to look at. I think for working class folks, yes, I do think it's going to work. I also think for the first time we're seeing a Republican candidate for president running on a massive tariff increase, which is essentially a tax increase, which is completely against the orthodoxy of what the American right has known for the better part of 100 years. But it's a populist message that's very protectionist, that works to protect manufacturing jobs for the non-college educated workforce, of which, again, Latinos are the fastest growing part of that. So yes, I think combined, all of these different policies are much more populist, much more protectionist, I would argue isolationist, a very dangerous direction for this country to be heading in. And it's also extremely unprecedented for a Republican to be taking these positions, because free market conservatism and capitalism has always argued a diametrically opposed position to where Donald Trump and the Republican Party is currently headed. But for the moment, I do believe politically, this is going to have some impact, not just in Nevada, but throughout a lot of working class communities in the Midwest, the South, and the Rust Belt.
Mike, as well, President Biden this week announced this new executive order which should shield maybe 500,000 or more undocumented spouses of American citizens and their children from deportation for green card processing. I wonder, how do you rate that, both as politics and as policy?
I think it's really bad politics. I think it's very good policy, which is the exact opposite of his previous executive order, which essentially shut down asylum and allowed the president unilaterally to close the border once it reached a certain level of asylum recipients, people seeking asylum. That to me was bad policy, but very good politics. What President Biden is trying to accomplish here is what the government has been unable to do for the past 3 decades, and that is accomplish a comprehensive immigration reform plan by executive fiat. That's the Congress has been unable to accomplish that, even though it's been desperately needed for decades. Both parties are to blame for that. Republicans have had complete control of the government for some years. Democrats have had complete control of the government for other years. Neither party has even moved the ball forward on this issue, and the crisis deepens. So I'm giving Joe Biden a lot of credit. It's a very bold move. It's very decisively against the orthodoxy of his own party, but it is clearly where the vast, vast majority of American voters and, incidentally, Latino voters want to see action, and he is doing it. He's trying to accomplish it by doing something that satiates the right, as he did on border security with asylum shutdowns, and now the left, which is providing essentially an amnesty program for the spouses of undocumented citizens. My strong suspicion is we're going to see a series of more executive actions floated through the course of the next few weeks as he tries to accomplish a very, very complicated, very comprehensive legislative fix to a pernicious, deep-rooted problem that our American system of government has not been able to fix in many decades.
Mike Madrid, would the Republican Party be doing any better or worse with Latino voters right now were Donald Trump not the presumptive Republican nominee? Would Ron DeSantis or Nikki Haley have had greater or less appeal, do you think, to Latinos?
That is a really good question. And because so many people are fixated on Donald Trump and the fact that he considerably increased his numbers with Latinos, the question often is, what is Trump doing to get so many new voters? The answer is really nothing. He's not doing anything. In fact, I would suggest most of the data points to him being in the way of a greater shift. Let me flesh that out a little bit. Ron DeSantis in Florida, one of the most heavily Hispanic states in the country. Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, another very large Hispanic state. Former Republican governor of Arizona, Doug Ducey, and even the Republican nominee against Gavin Newsom in California all have something in common, which is they all considerably overperformed amongst Hispanic voters compared to what Donald Trump has gotten. All of this is very strong evidence to suggest that Donald Trump is in the way of a larger Latino rightward shift because of the vulgarity, because of the crassness, because of the racism. And it shows also how strong the economic forces are at play for Latinos struggling as middle-class, lower middle-class voters to say, we're willing to support this guy if he's going to help us make rent on Friday or keep a good-paying job. So, yes, I think Republicans would be doing decidedly better without Donald Trump with Latino voters and would be in a commanding position nationally if they had another candidate.
Finally, Mike, if you were Joe Biden's advisor and he asked for one simple move that he could make to try to win the Latino vote and therefore the election, what would that move be?
I would immediately go to the Rose Garden and announce a Marshall Plan for housing construction for two reasons. The first is 1 in 5 Hispanic men are employed in the residential construction space or a related field. And the second is Latinos as 30 years of age or younger are in the prime ages of home buying at a time when interest rates have tripled and the US dollar has devalued by about 20% since Donald Trump was president. It's an economic gut punch to a wide swath of the Latino electorate. And housing is absolutely the right way to rectify the situation, ameliorate those economic concerns on both the employment side and on the consumer home buying side. So I would immediately announce a plan related specifically to Latino housing.
Mike Madrid, thank you for having a fireside chat with us this week.
Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
By this time next week, we will have seen the first of the 2024 presidential debates between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. It will be the first time ever that the same two candidates have debated in two different American presidential election years. Tens of millions of Americans are expected to tune in next week to see the rematch between Biden and Trump. No auto cues, no live audience, no notes, no microphones when it's not their turn to talk, and not surprisingly, no Robert Kennedy Jr. He did officially fail to qualify yesterday. Both Trump and Biden, though, will be hoping that this format reveals their opponents' weaknesses. Trump wants Biden to look old and crotchety. Biden wants Trump to look like Trump. Trump hasn't done himself any favours, perhaps, by helping to lower expectations of Biden, who does have a little bit of a habit of rising to big occasions. Think of this year's State of the Union, for example. But it could also be a bit of a high-wire act for Biden. He could have a senior moment that proves devastating for his election hopes. So there is a lot on the line. But Biden himself clearly sees an advantage in an incumbent president going into a debate as an underdog, or at least that's what he thought 48 years ago. Take a look at this.
34-year-old Senator Joseph Biden of Delaware believes the debates between Carter and President Ford starting next Thursday could determine to a great extent the outcome of the presidential election. Despite his optimism that Carter will win the debate, Senator Biden told newsmen today before a luncheon address to the City Club that looking at it realistically, the president could have a built-in advantage in his confrontation with Carter.
Well, I think he can benefit more because he's going in as an underdog, and no one really expects, the voting public, I don't think, expects him to be very sharp or quick. That's not an asset that's been attributed to him. So if he comes off as being either of those things, I think it enhances his position, his image.
I love that clip. It is like Joe Biden is talking about his future self.
It's also like Joe Biden has more hair 50 years later.
How does that happen? Must be something in Delaware's water supply or something. Meanwhile, with Donald Trump, of course, anything is possible next week. Remember back to when he brought those women who claimed to have been sexually abused by Bill Clinton to his first debate with Hillary Clinton, just days after he himself had been caught on tape boasting about sexual assault? Or when Trump went completely off the rails, interrupting Biden over 100 times in their first debate in 2020, we then discovered that was after Trump had tested positive to COVID, putting lives at risk and coming across as entirely unhinged. So with this, Chaz, I mean, we've talked before many times over the years about how managing expectations is hugely important. In a sense, expectations are incredibly low for both of them because Biden simply has to not fall asleep at the podium and he's probably won the debate, and Trump needs to just not set his hair on fire, and he does extremely well as well if they can just be normal.
Yes, well, on the expectations management front, I think that Hannity, Trump's friend Hannity, had a bit of a word to him about the fact that maybe he shouldn't be constantly talking about Biden not being able to string two sentences together, etc. Because Hannity has been trying to spin that Biden could be quite an impressive contender in this debate, but only because he's on drugs. And now Trump has taken that line as well, and they're both now talking quite a bit about the fact, Biden might do well because he's on drugs. You know, there's the same drugs.
Demanding a drug test beforehand.
Yeah, the same drugs he's on during the State of the Union. He's going to be on those drugs, so he could be very, very impressive. So they're trying to manage expectations in their own way. But it's kind of interesting, these rules. I think they really change everything, these rules, because what you're talking about there, Biden is so much less likely to melt down because of these rules. He can't get needled. He can't be interrupted. He has time to think. He can't be bullied. So he's much less likely to melt down.
Yeah, well, Trump's mic is going to be switched off, but Trump could still be chattering away from the other side of the stage while Biden is speaking, or, demonstrably rolling his eyes or huffing and puffing and carrying on. He could still be trying to put Joe Biden off his game. He
could, but I think it'll be much less effective than just bulldozing him like he did in the 2020 debate. And from Trump's point of view, he's much less likely to come off as a loon with these conditions. Like, you're right, he could be there rolling his eyes, and I'm sure if he does, there'll be a split screen for it. But I think that this is going to help him be controlled. This will help him come off better. So I think there's actually a much higher floor for both of them than there otherwise would be because of these rules, which is bad news for Biden because he needs more from this debate, I think, than Trump does.
Well, we've also talked in the past about how historically the incumbent president goes into the first debate of their re-election at a disadvantage. They've been president for the last 4 years. They haven't been on the campaign trail for the last 18 months in the way that their challenger usually has through their competitive primary process. A little bit different, though, this time. Joe Biden hasn't debated since he last debated Donald Trump in 2020. Donald Trump hasn't debated since then either.
Yeah.
So both of them are used to talking without interruption. Difference possibly is that Trump is used to a crowd that responds every time he is transgressive, rude, cheeky, funny. He gets a response. I wouldn't be surprised if Trump is thrown a little bit off his game, because when he needles Joe Biden about, say, Hunter Biden, or about any number of things that he'll try and get under Biden's skin about, because he knows that Biden is very emotional, particularly when it comes to his family, Trump is not going to get the ooh and the cheers from the peanut gallery. He's going to get Dana Bash and Jake Tapper just going, come on, move on. He's going to get the fisheye. I don't think Trump is going to respond to that, because Trump, part of his psychological makeup from everybody that we've spoken to over the years that has known him, that has analysed him, that have covered him, is, it doesn't matter what room he is in, he wants the people there to like him. Well, Joe Biden doesn't like him. Jake Tapper and Dana Bash, well, they're good journalists, but they're probably not there thinking, what a terrific guy. He's going to find that a tough room, I think.
Look, he's certainly not going to have a crowd to feed off. He'll probably be low energy because of that low energy Trump. But I keep on saying,
I think that's to his advantage.
I think low energy Trump is the best Trump as far as winning debates goes. Yeah. So I actually think I'm not saying he's going to just hit it out of the park, but I think he's unlikely to screw it up.
Well, when we saw Trump's second debate against Joe Biden in 2020, he was a lot more normal. Maybe he'd lost a little bit of energy because he nearly died of COVID. But he was lower energy, and you're right, it did help him.
And on that note, the real wild card for me is whether Judge Machan is due to come back to Trump in the next few days, telling him if he's under a gag order or not anymore. And that could be a wild card, because if Trump has the irrits about being under a gag order, that could be the kind of thing that he flips out about to his detriment. So whatever that, I don't think the actual gag order matters, but his reaction to the gag order is what matters. If he just goes on and on about it, that's not going to help him at all.
Although if it does mean that, look, I'd like to be able to answer your questions about the court case, Jake, but I'm under a gag order, I'm not allowed to say anything. It does get him if not a get out of jail card, it's a get out of answering questions about the case. And if he's smart, here's where I'd give a free bit of advice to Donald Trump as an amateur debate coach. Donald Trump should have a black handkerchief in his pocket, and the minute he's asked about his legal cases, he should gag himself and say nothing.
That's good free advice.
That would be a moment. That would be viral.
That would be a moment. That's good thinking. I'll just say one more thing about this debate, and that is, I mentioned before, I think Biden needs more from this debate than Trump, and let me just explain why. For the last 4 or 5 months, there's been a few viral clips, but honestly, Biden's been pretty good as far as the old person stuff goes. He hasn't really melted down. He's been out campaigning pretty well. The economy has been doing pretty well for him as well as it's going to do. Trump has just been convicted of a felony. You can't get better than that for Biden. Also, Biden's the only person who's spending money advertising at the moment. He's the only one running ads. Trump is not running ads. Trump's raising a lot of money that will be spent on ads at one point in time, but hasn't started yet. So Biden has every advantage right now. And what does he have to show for it? He has just today moved ahead of Trump by 0.1 of a point on the 538 national averages. He needs to be ahead by 2 or 3 points to win this election because of the Electoral College, okay? So he isn't anywhere near where he needs to be when everything's going right for him. So he needs to make this debate count just to get some momentum, because otherwise he's running out of opportunities to get ahead in this campaign. And he needs to get ahead. Otherwise, Trump has the advantage where they are right now.
Yeah, and another big advantage that we maybe discuss at another time is the anti-incumbency sentiment across the United States and indeed in Europe and South America as well at the moment is playing to Trump's advantage. This feels more like 2016 to me than 2020. Trump's not defending his record. That criminal conviction has made him an outsider again. He's the one who's now attacking the system once again rather than being a part of the system. So I think there's been a subtle shift, and it'll be fascinating to see how that presents itself in the debate. Look, one of the big issues that has, certainly as far as the Trump campaign has been concerned, is hammering the notion of law and order, whether it's border security or in America's big cities. There's a racial tinge to all of that, but this idea that crime is out of control. But there's some new data that basically says, no, none of that's true.
Yeah. According to The Economist magazine, at least, 63% of Americans say that crime is a very important issue for them this year, but only 33% of Americans approve of Biden's handling of crime, with 77% of Americans believing there's more crime in the US now than there was a year ago, at least according to Gallup. And this is an idea that the GOP is only too happy to encourage.
You're seeing, since Joe Biden took office, crime skyrocket all around the country, and especially in big cities.
In Venezuela, they took all of their criminals, a very heavily crime-ridden country. They took all of their criminals and they dumped them into a place called the United States of America.
And, you know, sometimes it does seem that they're right. Like when, for instance, a Secret Service agent was mugged in California earlier this week, and the RNC declared no one is safe in Biden's America. But, as John hinted, actual crime figures, well, they suggest a very different story. these are the most reliable crime figures you can get. Homicides, there's bodies on the floor here. And as you can see, there was a big spike in crime in 2020 under the Trump administration. And then it continued in 2021 under Biden. But since then, crime has been falling, and that trend has continued in a big way, with the first quarter homicide figures for 2024 being almost as low as they have ever been for the past 60 years. And it's not just homicides falling. Over the last 12 months, violent crimes decreased by 15%, murders have decreased by 26%, rape is decreased by 25%, robberies decreased by 17%, aggravated assault has decreased by 12%, property crime has decreased by 15%, and it just goes on and on. But are those crime drops restricted to rural areas maybe? No, they're everywhere. In fact, the biggest decreases in violent crime have been on the left of that graph, the big cities. Now, we should be clear, these are all preliminary figures we're talking about here, just the first quarter for 2024, so they could change a fair bit yet. But it's one thing for the figures to be as accurate as possible. It's another thing for people to believe those figures. When Trump was confronted with the real data by Time magazine a few months ago, he simply said, "I don't believe it." And then he said these were fake numbers. And then he said a very interesting thing. It came out last night, the FBI gave fake numbers. Now, what do you think he's referring to there? It came out last night. Maybe it's that literally every time new crime figures come out, if they're good, Fox News rushes someone on air to accuse those figures of being fake, like this guy.
40% of the nation's police departments don't report up to the FBI with their crime numbers. Oh. And what a coincidence. Let's do the roll call. New York, LA, Chicago, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., which is federal itself, they don't report to the FBI. So consequently, what do they all have in common? These are all big blue cities that have high crime rates, and those numbers are not going into the UCR. That's what they call FBI UCR crime reports.
That dude also said this.
For instance, this quarter, when Joe Biden is claiming violent crime is down, he's focusing on murders. Murders are down, the lowest rate going down, et cetera. Okay. The NYPD and the FBI murder number for this year are different by 44%.
Oh, wait a second.
And what an accident. It looks like the New York City number is a little bit higher than the FBI is telling you.
And he said so much more. Unfortunately, I'm not a crime expert, so it's hard for me to debunk that kind of stuff. So why don't we talk to someone who is? I ran every single one of the claims in that Fox News report past crime data analyst Jeff Asher earlier today. Now, first of all, Jeff, to the figures themselves, I've seen a graph that suggests 2024's early figures are damn close to 2014's 60-year low in the murder rate. So how likely is it that those numbers will stay that low when they're revised?
I think, one, it's still the first half of the year. So, you know, it's like at the halfway mark of a race, you're not suddenly saying which world record you've broken. I think that there's a lot of uncertainty, especially since we don't actually know what 2023 figures will be. So it's not really a question that we can answer with any sort of confidence. I tend to err on the side of safety and skepticism. So, you know, if the numbers still look the same and the 2023 numbers look like they fell bigger than normal, and we can start to do some more concrete math, then maybe that's something that we'll be able to say with a little bit of confidence. But at this point, there's no confidence.
Okay, Jeff, I want to go through some of this Fox News segment's claims. 40% of the nation's police departments don't report to the FBI with their crime numbers, including New York, LA, Chicago, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., etc. Is that true?
No, it's a reference to in 2021, the FBI switched crime reporting systems. They had this old system called the summary reporting system. They'd had that for almost a century. And they switched to a system called NIBRS, National Incident-Based Reporting System. And at that point, about 65% of the country's population was covered by a NIBRS reporting agency. And so in 2021, it led to a lot of uncertainty and a lot of confusion as to what our crime numbers were, because when you go from 95 to 97% reporting to 65% reporting, you have to add in big margins of error. If you've got, you know what 95% of a puzzle looks like, you don't really have to guess what the other 5% looks like. If you're missing 35% of a puzzle, you got to guess a lot. And so it led to these massive margins of error and massive confidence intervals. And in 2022, the FBI wisely backtracked and allowed agencies that weren't NIBRS compliant to report data through the old system to develop our national trends. And so the national estimates in 2022 were based off of 94% of the country's reporting, which historically 6% of the country not reporting is very normal, and actually up the percentage of 2021 reporting up above 70% to I think 73, 75%. So the 2021 figures, not particularly reliable. 2022 figures, decently reliable. 2023 and 2024 figures should be just as reliable. And I'm probably underselling when I say decently reliable. They were reliable in 2022. They should be reliable in 2023. And the 2024 figures also should be reliable. NIBRS coverage is up above 85%. New York Police Department is reporting, Chicago Police Department is reporting, Philadelphia Police Department is reporting, Washington, D.C. Police Department is reporting, Los Angeles Police Department is not reporting via NIBRS, but they are reporting via the old system. So there's no reason to expect that anything approaching what happened in 2021 has happened in any of the last few years.
Okay, here's another one for you. The FBI and NYPD numbers for murders this quarter are different by 44%, and the NYPD numbers are much higher than the FBI numbers.
That is true, and it's something that I wrote about, and I'm having another piece coming out hopefully next week about the fact that the FBI is basically in its quarterly data producing unaudited data. This is what the agency sent us. So the problem is that a lot of times the agency may have underreported for a certain month. There might be reporting errors. So the quarterly data, especially for the first quarter, is more prone to being off than other quarters. So New York has errors, Dallas has errors, I think Washington, D.C. has errors. There's a bunch of places that are seeing errors, which means that we probably shouldn't rely on the quarterly data for the first quarter as this iron tight, concrete, this is what the exact trend is. But we're able to see, looking at other cities, we're able to see, looking at other data sources, that the general trends, if we in our 260 sample show murder down 18%, that's a good barometer that the FBI 25% decline in murder for its larger sample is probably not exactly right, but it's probably going in the right direction.
Okay, that's enough of that horrible Fox News segment. Okay, so Jeff, why do you think you can do 1,000 interviews with people like me about the stats and the American people simply do not believe you?
I don't mean to offend, but I don't know how many Americans specifically in America are watching your program. So I think the bigger deal is, one, we have data issues. We especially have data issues in terms of understanding things quickly and understanding trends with the rapidity that we understand economic trends or agricultural trends. We understand those things much better than we do and much faster than we do crime data. I think that there's a tendency in the media to, there's a saying that the media doesn't cover the planes that land. And I keep using that saying, and it's become problematic because we have all these Boeing aircraft that keep landing with, missing a tire or something, and the media keeps covering them. But for the most part, there's no stories on, hey, there were no robberies last week. There were no shopliftings last week. So if you're only discovering incidents when an incident occurs, then you rely on anecdote, you rely on your memory rather than on actual data to know what the facts are. And I think that we're seeing in the last handful of months, the last handful of years, that the politicization of crime and crime trends, which has always existed, at least back to the 90s, it's gotten much worse. And so you've got a situation, especially with one political party, where either crime is going up or the data is wrong. And we have to create a situation where we're willing to understand what the trends actually are and be able, in a position to then derive what we can understand in terms of what were the successes and what were the failures and how can we lead to future successes.
Jeff Asher, thanks for joining us for a Fireside Chat.
Always.
And That is it for another Fireside Chat. We will have our post-debate chat next Friday on ABC News, and join us for plenty more on Planet America Wednesday night on ABC TV.
And both shows are on iView and online. We also find the Planet Extra podcast, better known as PEP. We like that. See you there.
Bye-bye.